The Nintendo Switch 2 has a Joy-Con problem. And no, it's not Joy-Con drift. Hopefully. The problem isn't a hardware defect, but rather a compatibility issue. You see, this is not the same as this. And this does not work the same way as this. So that raises the question. Are these first generation Joy-Cons going to be compatible with the Nintendo Switch 2? We already know that most Switch games will be playable on the new console, but that doesn't necessarily mean the controllers will work the same way. To better understand this, let's take a look at Nintendo's history of backwards compatibility within their home consoles.
Psychologists' offices might get more crowded this holiday season. Just in time for Christmas, the Japanese toy maker Nintendo has come out with a new set of electronic video games. At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system, and you can't mix and match.
The idea of backwards compatibility was never really a priority for Nintendo in the 80s and 90s. There was no official way to play NES games on the SNES or SNES games on the N64. It was a foreign idea for most developers for the longest time. Nintendo's mindset was simple. Consumers would buy the new console and new games, leaving the older generation behind. However, that would change in the early 2000s.
Let me introduce you to our new baby.
The GameCube. Despite nostalgia from early 2000s gamers, the Nintendo GameCube was a commercial failure, selling just under 22 million units. For perspective, the N64 sold 35 million units in a market that had a lot smaller demand for video games. So, when it came to the next generation, Nintendo knew they needed to heavily innovate off of what they and the others inside the industry had already done. Enter the Wii.
We've got one.
A smaller, slimmer, revolutionary home console. While Microsoft and Sony competed to create the most powerful hardware, Nintendo went down the path of uniqueness. This was a console that heavily focused on motion controls and easy accessibility to people who may have never played a video game before. This is something we had never seen. I could go on and on about the Wii and its development, but perhaps that's better saved for another video. Let's get back to backwards compatibility. So despite the GameCube being a commercial failure, its library of games had a lot going for it. Many of the first and third-party titles for this device were critically acclaimed. Rather than leaving behind those who bought into the GameCube infrastructure during a very competitive generation, Nintendo designed the Wii to be backwards compatible with it. This allowed GameCube owners to continue to play their library, but also gave the Wii 4 years worth of titles that could be played on launch. This was met with much excitement from critics and fans alike. Then, everyone saw what the Wii's controller looked like. In fairness, the controller was designed for a generation of people that had never touched a video game, but even with their nunchuck attachment, it did not seem very compatible with their GameCube games. So what was Nintendo's workaround for this? Basically, they put a GameCube inside a Wii. This is not an over-exaggeration. It even has the 4 controller ports and memory card slots. You could classify the Wii as a more powerful GameCube with motion controls. This is because the Wii's architecture is built right off the GameCube. They use the same type of processor. This allows for full native backwards compatibility, zero emulation. In this industry, don't get used to that. The Wii would go on to be massively successful, selling over 100 million units, the most successful product Nintendo had ever released. But just around the corner was the next generation for consoles, so it was time for Nintendo to innovate again. Before I get into the next console, leave a like since you made it this far, and consider subscribing so I can continue to make content like this. Thank you.
It's time for a whole new Nintendo experience. Wii owners and newcomers alike, it's time to play Wii U.
There is a lot to be said about what went wrong with this console. The problems were vast: poor marketing, lack of third-party support, and the strange gamepad tablet hybrid. This created a mess of confusion. People were unsure of what this was. I knew many people in my personal life that were convinced that this was a hardware accessory for the original Wii. And can you blame them?
Mom, we already have a Wii, sweetiekins. Here's you. Wii U is a total upgrade, Mother. And did you get younger?
Backwards compatibility may have contributed to this confusion. While it made sense to support Wii games after how successful the original console was, the way it was implemented was clunky. As mentioned before, the Wii was built off the GameCube's existing infrastructure. This allowed for you to play GameCube games seamlessly and natively. This is not how the Wii U worked. While the Wii U's components are very similar to the Wii's, they are slightly more complex. This means when you want to play Wii games, you are not starting the Wii from the Wii U's interface. Instead, the console would soft reboot and take you into a Wii virtual menu. This is because the hardware would need to run at those lower Wii specs. This is just the Wii's interface. Look, if you're making a sequel to your highest selling console ever, it completely makes sense to include the ability to play previous generation's games. However, when the consumer sees the Wii U, which looks like a Wii in every way, can also play Wii games, supports the original Wiimotes, you might start getting some confusion. I get it. Once you look into it, it makes sense. But if I was someone who may not be that great with technology in general, purchasing the Wii U would make no sense to me. Backwards compatibility to this extent hurt the Wii U. I will give credit where credit is due. This is technically also a native experience. No emulation is used to play these Wii games. It supports all Wii games as well. Unfortunately, no GameCube games though. This virtual Wii menu also let you transfer your data from your Wii to your Wii U, which allowed you to keep most of your virtual console and WiiWare games. The virtual Wii menu also had functionality with the Wii U gamepad, in the sense that you could use it as a secondary display, which is a neat inclusion. Something I will also give the Wii U credit for is the backwards compatibility with Wii controllers. This worked not only with Wii games, but also with Wii U games to a certain extent. You see, you would need to purchase a hardware accessory for the old Wiimote, called the Wii Motion Plus. This was required for some Wii U games. Yes, this was an extra purchase, but still cheaper than buying a new controller at the time. Granted, the cross-compatibility also did not help when differentiating between these two consoles. But this is something we loathsome see now in the gaming industry. So it is appreciated. And Nintendo had no incentive to do this. They could have easily made more money off people buying new controllers. So the Wii U and its backwards compatibility comes and goes. It ends up being one of Nintendo's worst selling consoles, only selling a little over 13 million units. They played it too safe, creating a console that was unique in certain aspects, but also too similar to its predecessor. The Wii generation was over, and it was time to innovate again, causing the backwards compatibility standard to change once again. It is at this point Nintendo seemed to have realized their mistakes. They created something too familiar with the Wii U. This time, they would do the polar opposite. The Nintendo Switch. This console was met with much skepticism when it was first revealed. Coming off the Wii U, people had their doubts about Nintendo. Part of the criticism was the complete lack of backwards compatibility. Nintendo was not only completely leaving the Wii brand behind, but they also decided to switch back to cartridges. There would be no way for you to play your disc games on this device. This created some fun rumors back in the day though. People would speculate that the Switch was going to be backwards compatible with the DS, something we still have not seen. Unfortunately, this console had zero backwards compatibility. This meant no way for you to play your Wii or Wii U games, no native controller support, and no way to transfer previous purchases. This was a new start, a new beginning. And it worked. The Nintendo Switch is one of the best-selling game consoles of all time. And while there was no backwards compatibility, that did not stop us from seeing many Wii and Wii U titles again. Similar to the GameCube, the Wii had some great titles, even though they did not sell well. So a lot of these games have made their way over to the Nintendo Switch, repackaged or remastered. This is pretty controversial because on one hand, it is great to be able to play these games again, but on the other, these older titles are usually sold at full price. That brings us full circle back to the Switch 2. Nintendo has already confirmed that most Switch games will be playable. This is great news, because we will avoid those repackaged older titles at full price. But there is a disclaimer claiming there will be certain exceptions. One of the biggest reasons for that? The Joy-Cons. The new Joy-Cons for the Switch 2 are larger, have new features, and seem to be missing some existing features, such as the IR sensor. So games that require those specific Joy-Con features are not going to work, along with games that were designed around the Joy-Con. For example, Ring Fit Adventure or the Labo games. That brings me to my point. Will these older Joy-Cons work on the new hardware? You might be thinking, Nintendo could just make the first generation Joy-Cons compatible with the Switch 2. Sounds easy. And while that initially makes sense, does Nintendo really want to do that? As we saw with the Wii U, Nintendo doesn't want their new console to be too similar to its predecessor. We already have backwards compatibility with Switch 1 games, and let's be honest, the console itself doesn't look too different. Making the old Joy-Cons fully compatible might blur the lines too much between generations, creating confusion, something they want to avoid. I don't think Nintendo is going to make that mistake again. And let's be honest, Nintendo has no incentive to make them compatible. Joy-Con sales are a huge business for Nintendo. They'll want to sell new models in various colors, just as they have in the past. Even if they did allow older Joy-Cons to work, there's another issue: charging. The new docking system is totally different, which means older Joy-Cons will not charge the same way. Are there workarounds for this? Sure, but nothing that won't be tedious or cost more money. So, are the first generation Joy-Cons going to work with the Switch 2? Probably not. This is what Nintendo prefers. If history shows us anything, Nintendo will want to differentiate these consoles in some aspects. They do not want to repeat history and create a console too similar to its predecessor. They will not have another Wii U. While it will be disappointing not being capable to use the older Joy-Cons on the new hardware, I am still grateful to have backwards compatibility to the extent we do. As it stands right now, that is not the standard in the gaming industry, especially not with Nintendo over the past few generations. Despite not being able to use my older controllers, it is refreshing to know that I will have access to these games for the next couple of years. So, tell me what you think down below. Do you think the older Joy-Cons are going to work on the new hardware? If you've enjoyed, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.